I'm really excited to welcome all of you guys to FAM, our podcast celebrating friends in film, fashion, art, music, and media. My name is Johnny Hwin. I'm the co-founder and artist in residence here at 57. And tonight we're honored to have an extraordinary guest who sits at the intersection of art and entrepreneurship in the music industry. Lawrence Lui, where are you? Can you step right up, please? Step right up, Mr. Lawrence Lui. Lawrence Lui is one of the top dance music professionals in the world. As the former senior director of marketing at Astralworks, Capitol Island, and Virgin Records, he's led campaigns for iconic artists, including Swedish House Mafia, Above and Beyond, Deadmau5, Porter Robinson, the Chemical Brothers, and many more. He currently runs Bampire Music, the premier marketing agency for electronic dance music, while also serving as the vice president of the New York chapter of the Recording Academy, the Grammys. And what many actually don't know about Lawrence is that he's also an accomplished recording artist himself with millions of streams and acclaim from outlets like The Wire and Indie Shuffle. Throughout his career, he's also been an advocate for Asian American causes within the music community and beyond. And tonight's a very special Friday night edition of FAM because it's also AAPI month. Shout out AAPI. Tonight, we're going to explore his journey from college radio DJ to music industry executive, his creative process as an artist, and his unique perspective on the evolving landscape of music marketing as an entrepreneur. Please welcome Lawrence Lui, everybody. Really excited to have you, Lawrence, because so much of what our community is about is celebrating creativity in all these different manifestations from art, music, and entrepreneurship. You happen to embody all three. And so one of the things I'm really curious about with so many of the folks that we bring into these talks is, how did it all begin for you? When did you come to realize art is something I really want to get into? Music is something I really want to get into. Entrepreneurship is something I really want to get into. And, I think maybe the best way to do that is tackle it one at a time. I'm curious, for you, let's talk with your love of music first, because that's sort of the through line across everything you do. At what point did you have this conscious understanding of, damn, that song is sick. That drop is dope. The build,
Well, it's so funny you should mention it that way, because I'm a little bit older, so it wasn't about drops and stuff when I was coming up. Just in high school, I just got really, really into music, and just became obsessed, and just huge record collector. Went to a lot of shows, went to a lot of, classic shows like, Depeche Mode at Madison Square Garden and Prince at Madison Square Garden. I grew up in New York, and yeah, so I just got really, really into music. Then when I went to college, I started working for the college radio station, and I worked my way up there to be the music director, and then from there it was kind of a open door for me into the whole music business. I started doing radio promotions for cool little indie labels and larger labels, and started doing marketing for these larger labels for the labels you just mentioned, part of Universal Music. And it's been a wild ride,
Yeah, well, I want to get into your journey into college radio. I think that's such an interesting inflection point. But even taking a step back, were your parents musical? Who got you into the Depeche Mode? It's a pretty cool band for a kid.
Yeah. I actually had I had a friend. So I was just, honestly, I was just into, I was just listening to the radio and was just into whatever was popular at the time. And then I had a friend from high school. His name was Daniel. And then he was kind of, saw what I was listening to and was like, what are you doing listening to that? Check out these other bands, more alternative bands like Depeche Mode, The Cure, things like that. And that kind of opened my mind. This at the time was industrial music was really big, and
shout out Daniel.
Yeah. So he's the one who kind of opened up the whole world of music to me that was beyond just listening to whatever happened to be big on the radio.
It's so funny, these sliding doors moments or the butterfly effect, where it's without Daniel, you'd still be on Vanilla Ice.
Yeah.
That might be a little bit too old for some folks in the room.
Remember?
Vanilla Ice, less cool.
Yep. So yeah, I think that was an inflection point. Getting involved in college radio at the time when I was coming up, college radio was considered kind of the breeding ground for like hot new bands. That's where, Nirvana came out of there. That's where the Pixies came out of there. So, I come from a real kind of indie music background, even though I'm known for marketing electronic dance music, but my background is real like indie music, indie rock, that type of stuff. And yeah.
So in high school, Dan turns you on to indie music, these bands. And were you a musician back then as well? Did you start playing music?
Yeah, in high school, I actually tried to start a band with Daniel, but the lyrics were so bad that the next day I would listen to them and be like, no, this is not going to work out. It's not Daniel's fault. I was always the singer, and so, yeah. High school, bad lyrics, had the so I didn't really start in high school, but once I was in college, I made some lo-fi records that was signed to a label and put out an album. I did a little tour behind that as well. And then more recently, I've been doing more electronic music, like ambient, kind of techno, experimental type stuff. So, yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there. And I kind of want to zoom in real quick on the college years.
Sure.
You're in college, you've just opened your mind to Depeche Mode and all these cool bands from the 80s. And you decide, I want to be a radio college DJ.
Yeah, it just seemed like a natural thing to do because because of my just total fandom and geekdom about records and music, to get involved in the radio station. And yeah, I just got involved and if you stick with something long enough, you can, at first you're given a show in the middle of the night at that starts at, on Saturday at 4 a.m. or something like that a slot that nobody wants. But then, as you stick with it year after year, they start giving you better slots. They realize you're really kind of a conscientious DJ and you know what you're doing and you know what you're playing. And then, you get promoted eventually through the ranks. It's sort of been the story of my life. It's just kind of slow and steady wins the race. Yeah. Just keep doing what I'm doing well. And then, eventually, you're in the right place in the right time to, get that cool job.
And so you're college radio DJ, but also making music on the side as well? Because you mentioned you had put together demo tapes.
Yeah, no, yeah. I had a lo-fi project when I was in college, in my early 20s. Like I said, that was actually signed to a label called Turducken Records.
And how did you get signed to a label?
It's once again, it's sort of who you know, right? Because of my involvement in college radio, I got to know this other guy. His name is Anthony Del Rosario. He ran a radio station in New Orleans, and he also had a little small kind of boutique indie label. And he liked my music and said, "Hey, can I put it out?" And I was like, "Sure," and he put it out. So it really is just these building relationships through the years, that kind of gets these opportunities.
And so, at what point, I think one of the interesting things that a lot of us who are pursuing our artistry, whether it's music or photography or film, at what point did you hit this inflection point where you're like, okay, this is something I can actually do. I can devote my life, maybe not to making lo-fi ambient electronic music, but I can devote my life to music and this world of music that's my passion.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think for me, I was getting into music, but I never really thought of it as a job for throughout college. I never really thought of something I could make money off of, right? So I was a film major as well, right? And I was thinking of going to the film industry as well, right? But then I had this interesting, moment in which, because I was making music, I was making my lo-fi music, on a 4-track in my room, right? And when you're making music, and this is true today, you can create something over a few hours, which you can listen back to the next day. As long as the lyrics are good, that you like. You're like, this is good. I have something here. To make a film that I would, think in the same terms, in the same way, it's a whole production, right? It's the crew,
Quite
and it's
literally
cinematography and the lighting and all the and the budgets and getting the money together for it. It's like too much logistics for me. So I ended up just going into music because it was easier and I was lazy. But
do what's easy and lazy. That's the takeaway, everybody.
but you're able to create something very quickly. Sort of like writing a poem. That you believe in. That you think you can put out into the world.
Yeah.
And it was more immediate for me than film. So.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to take a step back and sort of look at the feedback loop that has evolved over time from ideation to realization. Back in the day, whether it's making a film or even making music, especially making film, but with making music, it wasn't as easy as like opening up GarageBand on your iPad and putting some loops together. You actually had to like find a tape recorder, get a microphone, get into a studio. There was such a big barrier to entry, and the feedback loop between having this impetus to create and then the ability to actually realize your dreams was much larger and longer than it is today. And on some levels, we're quickly approaching this world with technology, and we talk about this a lot at a lot of our salons, where we're starting to see that feedback loop tighten, almost to the point where part of what makes the art good is the struggle to make the art versus being able to just type into a chat box, make me a melodic house and techno song that feels like you're driving through a rainy night,
Right. Yeah. I think that you're right. It is a lot easier to make music now. It's a lot easier to make things sound good now. So there is that immediacy, but you're right. There still needs to be that soul behind it, that kind of, honestly, kind of suffering, and feeling behind it that you don't get from AI created, pieces and things, so.
I want to put a pin in that specific thread for just a moment, because I want to continue back to your story with, going from college radio DJ to just, potentially going to film, realizing that music is a lot easier, being lazy, which is, the story of your life. No, I'm kidding. The story of your success, though, comes from really just, being consistent, continuing to explore the things that interest you. Do you remember your first few jobs in the music industry?
Yeah. Basically, when I became music director at WNYU, which is, NYU's radio station, I was right in New York. And that sort of was my foot in the door, because I began, I began talking to a lot of people in the industry, right? I started being a radio promoter. And so that was sort of my first job in the music industry. Yeah. So I remember it well. We worked out of the owner's home. She had a couple of dogs that were always throwing up on the floor at her home. And so, me and, the head of production, who was also sitting there, and that we were all in the same room, she was like, I'm not cleaning that up, so go tell. Yeah. So anyway.
And then you went on to be a senior music director of some of the biggest, labels. I'm curious, as senior music director, what were some of the most viral, interesting marketing campaigns that you ran?
Oh, yeah. Well, one that comes to mind is I worked on Swedish House Mafia from the very beginning of when they were signed to Virgin. All the way up to when they broke up the first time. I don't know how many times they broke up now, but it was an amazing ride. They became the first DJs to play Madison Square Garden. They did arena tours. They had a huge hit with "Don't You Worry, Child," and they were a worldwide phenomenon. And And what I did when they came and played Madison Square Garden for the first time, they sold it out in something like 8 minutes, was that I arranged for the Empire State Building to be lit in the Swedish colors in honor of them. You know, they were also doing a Hurricane Sandy a charity event as well, so that kind of helped, and it was all for free as well because it was all for charity. So that was great. I also helped above and beyond. I put together a plan that helped get their last album, Common Ground, to number 3 on the U.S. chart, the Billboard Top 200, which is very, very rare for an electronic dance music act on an independent label. It's almost unheard of. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, so that was like based on a plan, an idea that I had, and just the experience that I had working at major labels, you know, and how they, you know, try to get good chart positions, you know. So I knew all the little tricks of the trade there, and so I helped them. Yeah, I helped them get that number. So that felt really good as well because they're a brilliant band. You know?
Yeah,
they play. You know, I think, you know, they have new music coming out soon. So
that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And so fast forward to today, you run your own music marketing agency, Bampire Music, also Reflector, a PR agency as well. How have you seen the music marketing landscape change from when you were first starting in the industry to where you sit today?
Wow. Oh, that's a big question. You know, it's changed, but it's still the same. You know, there's still gatekeepers. There's still the labels that need to sign the artists. You know, and then there's still, whether it's Spotify now or Apple back in the day when it was still downloads. You know, it's still like curators and gatekeepers and editorial that were sort of deciding, you know, what was cool. You know, what was going to be the next big thing, you know? I think it's also changed a lot because things are a lot more algorithmic. Now people are discovering music in completely different ways. You know, they're delivered music by the algorithm now and not by a person, you know?
The gatekeepers have become the robots.
Yes, yeah. The robots have become gatekeepers in a way. Yeah, exactly. Which is so, you know, a lot of things change, but a lot of things still say the same. You know, yeah.
It's interesting because whether you're a musician or a filmmaker or an artist, there's just this, you know, thinking through almost the game of marketing in this level of abstraction here. There's always just some gatekeeper that you have to win over, like some boss you have to defeat to get to the next level. Mm-hmm. And through each step of the way, you're, you know, moving and pushing your music and art further and further and further. The one caveat now, I think that's interesting, that's different from how things were maybe 10, 15 years ago is social media. Now it's like with social media, whether you're an artist or a painter or a filmmaker, you have the opportunity to go direct to your fans and grow that fandom without having these gatekeepers, these human gatekeepers. But yeah, there are still the algorithmic gatekeepers, if you will, to get you. But it's more a function now of, you know, how good your quote unquote content is. I'm very curious because I'm sure you hear a lot as someone in music marketing at Bampire from your artists, like, who are trying to figure out their social media strategy. And I'm sure, like many of us who are artists who just want to work on our art, the last thing we want to work on is our social media strategy. Yeah. And so for those of us who are just lamenting the idea of having to just do, you know, something viral, how do you advise and work with your clients? I know you have some clients like Claude Von Stroke and other folks who are, you know, figuring this out still, who are, you know, quite large as well. How do you think, and how do you advise them on figuring out how to navigate the social media landscape today?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question because, you know, social media dominates promotion so much these days. But on the opposite side of the coin, we work with a lot of artists, and some artists are great with it. But there are many, many artists who got into it for the music. They're musicians first, and they could be introverts, and they don't want and they don't want to kind of present themselves, to the world in that way. They're not influencers. They're not personalities, that want to be very front facing. There's someone that really, really gets music and really knows how to make it. Doesn't necessarily make you an extroverted personality, right? And so navigating that is an interesting game, because at the same time, I also feel very strongly that social content needs to come from the depths of your soul. What I mean by that, it's got to be them. It's got to be authentic to them, right? If they have the marketing team or the label sort of do it for them or make suggestions, it never really comes off as authentic and as good and as something that is, virally sticky than something that they really believe in. Whether it's if they're really into cooking or running, or they have a hobby or something like that, or some aspect of their music, it's still got to come from the depths of their soul. But at the same time, a lot of these artists, they're more protective of that, understandably, and they don't really want to show that, overshare that to the world. And so that's kind of a very fine line that you have to, everyone recognizes social media is important, but at the same time, a lot of artists kind of shy away from it as well. So I think the big plus about social media is that it's sort of quote unquote easy to do, right? Because the most authentic content is something that someone could just shoot really off the cuff, really quickly. Doesn't need to look like it's perfectly edited or color corrected or anything, and just do it and just get it out there and just give your fans a sense of your life, what's happening behind the scenes or something like that. That's what they really want to see, that authenticity. And that authenticity is okay if it's really lo-fi. It's okay if it's really kind of off the cuff. And so in that sense, it should be easier to do. And if you put that low pressure on them, I feel like that kind of, if that clicks with them, that will help make them help them make great content. So
the authenticity piece, the authenticity point is an interesting one. I think this is related also to your art, making art as well, in that when we make art for ourselves, it often turns out it's the best art. And if we like it ourselves, there's going to be someone out there who also likes it. When we make art with someone else in mind or an audience in mind, like it always seems to turn out that it's not quite as good. And I think there's something about that point that translates with social media as well. And I think part of what is draining for so many artists, I think when it comes to social media, is the idea that social media has to be about marketing. Social media marketing is usually...
It should just be you. It should just be an extension of what you want to show to the world.
Because ultimately we are artists, we are not marketers. Right. And so we want to make art, we don't want to market necessarily. Right. So a friend helped shift this concept around for me when he was like, when I thought about it as marketing, I stopped doing it because it was just so draining. If something didn't
work, overthinking.
You start overthinking it.
Yeah.
When I started thinking about it as what is my art project that I want to express visually that is a complement to the music, then that was when it clicked for him. And that was when he just started making stuff and posting it every day, irrespective of whether it was good or not. He didn't even care. He didn't even have a filter, if you will. And so when he changed the mental framing from I'm going to make social media to market to I'm going to make social media to make art, that's when he started going viral. And funnily enough, the other day he calls me up and he's like, dude, you won't believe it. The famous rapper producer Timbaland, as many of us know,
I love him,
just slid into my DMs. And I was like, whoa, dude, that's crazy. What's he trying to get from you? And, they exchanged numbers. Timbaland calls him out of the blue. And the first thing he asks is, yo, Greg, what inspires you, man? What inspires you? Because your shit is wacky. And that's the thing. His shit was wacky. The stuff that he started posting online was wacky because he's kind of a wacky dude. He's got this big curly head of hair, these glasses, and he's like making super soulful, wacky funk music that just, feels really good. But the visuals that accompany it are like really silly and lo-fi. And that's his art. And because he loves doing it, he does it every day, and something hit and something just resonated with something else. And so I think the key takeaways I'm getting from today are figure out who you are to be authentic in what you make, whether it's what you make for your art or what you make for social media, because oftentimes the best are when they're one and the same.
Yeah, I mean, people can tell if it's coming from your soul, or if it's something that some marketing team kind of dreamed up for you, And I think that, that matters a lot. So I think that's.
So does that mean you're going to be out of a job now that you're the marketing team?
There's always going to be introverted artists who just want to hand it over, to their team.
Your job is more of like the marketing Rick Rubin, where you're like, your job is done as soon as you finish the music. Your job is.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, it's an interesting world. It's an interesting world with all the social media.
Yeah. And bringing it back to the AI point, I'm really curious how you see that actually affecting music marketing, music content creation. Are you seeing your clients use AI, whether it's to write, create visuals, make videos, market themselves online?
I think that's going to happen more and more. Right? The artists that I work with in the DJ culture world, some of them are older, some of them are younger. I think, it runs the gamut. Some of them, they don't use AI at all. Some of them may start using AI for their imagery. I think we're coming towards an inflection point where people are going to not be able to tell the difference what's AI or not. And I think once we reach there, it's going to be interesting, because right now I feel like there's still a need and a bias towards, as we were saying, authenticity, and something that comes from, the human soul, and something that has that. So for now, I think people are still making their own music, Of course, I think AI is changing music making technology more than it is changing marketing. I mean, we do things, like marketing, there is going to be, there's algorithms and things like that. But right now, the acceleration in AI is mostly in the making of music. Now you can hum something, and then you can turn that into a pop song, right? Or that's the direction AI is kind of going right now, and it's going to be interesting. Yeah,
I think you're in a really interesting seat here because you're both an artist and an entrepreneur in music marketing, and you're getting to see both sides of that with not just the marketing itself, but also with making art and making your own music. I know we didn't get a chance to go too deep into it, but tell us a little bit about the music you're making today. And also I'm curious about how new technologies, including AI, plays a role in the stuff that you're working on right now.
I kind of sort of messed with AI a little bit on some of my music a few years ago. And this was very, very kind of rudimentary, where you could just type in words and have a voice kind of say those words, in a very rudimentary way. And a lot of the plugins that these days, the music technology uses AI to help kind of clean things up. But for the most part, 99% of what I do, it's just, for better or worse, what I'm throwing out into the world is me, is not it isn't affected by AI, because I mean, my music is so weird and idiosyncratic, and AI, it's not the point where they can make something like that or come up with something like that. Not to say that I'm so great or whatever, although.
But you are.
I don't know. Yeah. But for AI, it's sort of like, well, make something that sounds like K-pop or make something that sounds like it's an imitation machine, right? More than it is kind of can create originality.
Okay. Right? Imitation, not innovation.
Yeah.
And you just put out a song recently, a cover of Brian Eno.
Yes.
Ironically, is one of the pioneers and forefathers of the intersection between music and technology.
Yeah, absolutely. He was, he's definitely one of my favorite producers. I'm really kind of obsessed with different producers, and he's definitely one of the legends out there. And it's actually next week I'm putting out a cover of his song Fractal Zoom, which was on a 1990s album of his. And I actually did the song for a WFMU promotion, a WFMU like compilation, and it came out really well. So I am releasing it next week on his birthday.
Hell yeah.
May 14th,
That's awesome,
May 15th. So yeah.
For the aspiring artists and entrepreneurs in the room today, what advice would you give them if you could look back at yourself in your college radio days? What advice would you give yourself even?
Wow. It's first of all, you never know where the journey is going to take you. You think you're on the path to doing this one thing, and then something else might come in and change your life completely. So I've just sort of been along for the ride in a way, and just be open to that, and I had something else, but
be lazy. That's all I'm going to remember. No, I'm kidding. No, I love that. Yeah. Be authentic.
Yeah.
Be open.
Yeah.
And be lazy.
Yeah. I think, what was the other thing I had? I can't remember. Just be open to the possibilities of what can happen to you. Oh yeah. Here, I just remembered, honestly, one of the biggest issues that musicians are having in music today is the inability to make money off of their music. Right. This is not the 70s anymore. You're not going to, you'll buy an airplane if you have a couple of platinum records and things like that. You can be a touring musician and be making, $16,000 a year for years and years and not have health insurance or anything like that. And the way, streaming services work, you're getting, pennies or fractions of pennies for streams and things like that. So a lot of the conversation that's going on is how are we supposed to make music? How are we supposed to make a living off of music? And I think what I've done in my life is I've always been a multitasking, a multi-hyphenate. So, I started a company. I worked at big multinational companies, So I think the next model, or I think the model that most people realize they have to take these days to be creative, to make music, is to do different things, and to have, so basically what I'm saying is, don't quit your day job. You can still make music on the side, because in today's world, music is easier to make. You can just make it off your laptop. You can just make it off your computer with free plugins. It's a lot more immediate as far as the making of music. So that will kind of free up your time. Hopefully, if you don't, have too much of a absorbing day job to make music as well as make money on almost like a side hustle type situation. I think there's going to be more and more of that. A lot of the musicians I meet, they do something else as well, as I always have. So, yeah.
No, that's awesome. Cool. Thank you so much for your time, man.
Ooh, I'm glad I remembered that. That's a nugget there, right?
Dropping wisdom. Do you have time for a couple of questions? So 2 questions. First hand up gets it. Any questions in the room?
The streaming and the internet has really killed the ability to make music profitable. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's what. Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's just like 2 or 3 services that are really monopolizing the whole industry in a way that wasn't there 30 years ago. So my question is, a reflective question is I'm not a musician, for you guys who are, is, what can you come up with to sort of take away that monopoly?
Yes. You know what? I had this thought, really recently. When I used to, be a music fan and run out to the record store and buy records and then listen to them to death. I had a completely different relationship with music than most people have today, and that I have today. And what I mean by that is I would listen to a record until I liked it, because I paid like a lot of money for it, right? Comparatively, right? But I paid like $15 for it, right? So I'm gonna like it. I'm gonna listen to it no matter what, even the bad songs, until and that's how you build fandom, because eventually that quote unquote bad song becomes your favorite song, in a few years when you finally get it, So the fandom's different. Now it's just the algorithm feeding you something you might like, and you're just kind of rolling along.
It's hard to get people to give you 3 seconds of their time,
Right, exactly.
Because something new is a swipe away.
Yeah, because back in the day, you were invested. You would just listen to the whole thing and try your best to get into it, even though at first you may not be into it. Because you love the band, you love the artist, you're trying to get them, you're reading the lyrics, you're reading the credits and the liner notes, so they don't even have that anymore.
Yeah.
You're just obsessed, right? Now people have a completely different relationship with music because it's just a tap that you turn on, and it just creates a vibe and an atmosphere around it. So,
I'm glad you asked that question. Right here, you got the last question.
Yeah. So I've sort of heard this idea simmering from different sources that right now we have a lot of the conditions for a creative renaissance. There is economic instability. There is monopolization of the industries. There is a very capitalistic approach nowadays to art. And I've heard people making this interesting comparison, like how in the past in history that led actually to some of the greatest creative eras, such as, for example, the golden age of cinema that came out during the Cold War, right? That happened. So I was just wondering, where do you think, as a whole, creativity will go in the future? What do you think would sort of be the natural progression from where we're at right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always really optimistic, that generation after generation, people are inventing new sounds, new interesting ways to approach music, to approach business that kind of regenerates, the whole thing and changes the game, changes the map, So, I think changes in history and sort of the chaos of time are always going to happen. They've been happening since ancient times, right? So, as artists, in a sense, our job is to sort of reflect that and also reflect what's in our souls, right? And I think there's always going to be a new generation of artists, musicians, creatives that are going to do things in a new way, that are going to speak to the times in a new, unique, and innovative way. And we can't even imagine it now. Right? I mean, in the 70s, no one could imagine drum and bass music. That would have just been insane, like science fiction to them. So there's things that are going to be invented, in a year from now, 2 years from now, after we die, that we can't even imagine, what it's going to be like, and that's exciting. That there's always going to be something, because people can get apocalyptic about the times and the way, the economy and the way, that's more difficult to be a musician now. But there's always, things change all the time. There's one thing that stays the same. It's change.
Imagine playing your grandparents' Skrillex. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much, Lawrence. Give it up for Lawrence, everybody.